Before I begin, I would like to say that I won't be able to shake your hands or anything because I've been feeling sick recently. But thank you so much for judging me. Many people ask, how can God become a man? How can somebody be both a God and a man? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, God created men, right? So aren't they totally separate from him? Well, the answer to this question is something called the deity of Christ. The topic I've drawn today is what is the meaning and significance of the deity of Christ. And so I'm going to be explaining, first of all, what it means that Jesus is both God and man, but especially how that Jesus, even though he was a man, he was still fully God. And then I'll be talking about the significance and how, because he was both God and man, he can act as our mediator and as our Savior. So, first of all, let's talk about what is the meaning of the deity of Christ. Gresham Machen, in his book, in his article, What is the Deity of Christ, said, quote, "Now the Christian meaning of the term deity of Christ is fairly clear. The Christian believes that there is a personal God, creator and ruler of the universe, a God who is infinite, eternal, and unchangeable. So, when the Christian says that Christ is God, or when he says that he believes in the deity of Christ, he means that the same person who is known to history as Jesus of Nazareth existed before he became a man and from eternity as infinite, eternal, and unchangeable God, the second person of the Holy Trinity." End quote. In other words, this means that Jesus was a man, but he was God. He was God from the time the world began. John 1:1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But then in verse 14 it says, "And the Word became flesh." God, in the form of Jesus Christ, was manifested to man as Jesus Christ. So the Word was from the beginning, and then he became Jesus to manifest himself to us. And then he died on the cross to save us. But all the time he was still God, even though he was fully man. Now this is very hard to understand. But there's a lot of things about God that are hard to understand. Our human minds simply cannot grasp the whole entire other dimension that we simply can't explore. It's like a first grader trying to understand calculus. We just can't understand it. But it is very significant. And so for the rest of this speech, I'm going to be talking about the significance of Jesus as God, specifically the deity of Christ. There are two main things that this means. Number one, it means that Christ is our mediator between God and man. 1 Timothy 2:5 says there is one God and one mediator between God and man. In other words, we as sinful human beings cannot communicate with God because God cannot even look on sin. And so we have to have a mediator, someone to go between us and God. It's like if I try to send a letter to you, but you live in California, I can't just put it in the mailbox and it arrives at you. A mailman has to take the message. Christ is our mediator. He takes the message from us to God. And he also takes the message of God and brings it to us. That's part of what it means for him to be the Word. That he was the Word. He is the mediator, the messenger of God to us. So, now a very interesting thing to note about this is that he can be a good mediator because he understands us. Hebrews 2:18 says, "For we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin." In other words, Christ understands us. When he was on earth, he was tempted by the devil. Now, he was God, so of course he didn't sin. But he understands what it is like to be tempted. And so when we ask God to help us with temptation, Christ, our mediator, can understand us and can relay that message to God better than anyone else could. Not like the high priest. He is not a high priest which can't be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. In the Old Testament, there were high priests, which were the sort of mediators in the Old Testament. But since they were not God, they weren't a perfect mediator, and that's why Jesus had to be both God and man with his deity. So he's the mediator, but he's also our Savior. See, because God was perfect, because he did not yield to temptation and did not sin, then he can redeem us. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, "For he hath made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him." What this is saying is that none of us could have paid for our sins. None of us could have done this. None of us could have redeemed ourselves from hell. But Christ could. Because he was God. Because he came to earth and lived a sinless life and died on the cross in our place. He was the only one who could do that. Because of his deity, and therefore his perfection, he could take our place on the cross and be our Savior. One day we'll go to heaven and we'll be with our Savior. And we'll be with God because of what Christ has done. Taking on the form of human flesh. The Word was made flesh. He was manifested to us, and now we can go to heaven. So today we've seen what the deity of Christ is. It means that God came to earth as a man. And that man still retained the entirety of being God. He did not lose any of it. He was still all-knowing. He was still unchangeable. The Bible even says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He was still possessor of all the attributes of God. He was still totally God. But he was also a man. And because he was a man, he can understand us. He can be our mediator between God and man. But most importantly, he can be our Savior. The deity of Christ means that we have a connection with God through Jesus Christ. Thank you.